Good morning, everybody. You're watching our mid-morning edition of Arirang News on this Thursday, June 11th. Coming to you live from Seoul, I'm Shin Se-min. Before we begin, here are the stories we're following at this hour. The Federal Reserve keeps U.S. rates steady at near 0% until at least 2022. In addition, the Fed indicates Wall Street could be due for a correction and the markets react. But out of our business, North Korea says the U.S. has no standing to comment on inter-Korean affairs. It also tells the Trump administration to stay mum if it wants to win the presidential election in November. Plus, in the ongoing probe and possible indictment on one of the world's most powerful business tycoons, valid or not, that's what an external panel of citizens will be discussing today. It comes just days after a Seoul court rejected an arrest warrant for Samsung's head honcho, Lee Jae-yong. Our top story this morning, the U.S. Federal Reserve has left its benchmark interest rates unchanged at near 0% to 0.25% as widely expected. The Federal Reserve also revealed that it doesn't expect to raise the federal fund rate until at least 2022 due to the current social unrest, as well as the chaos caused by the COVID-19 outbreak. Our Lee Seung-jae with more.
The Federal Open Market Committee announced after its policy meeting Wednesday that it will leave its benchmark interest rate at near zero in the 0.25% rate as was widely expected.
We're not thinking about raising rates. We're not even thinking about raising rates. So what we're thinking about is providing support for this economy. We do think this is going to take some time.
Thanks very much. Wrapping up its two-day meeting, the committee said it expects to maintain this target range until it's confident the American economy has weathered recent events and is on track to achieve maximum employment and the Fed's price stability goals. The Fed, which lowered rates twice in March due to the COVID-19 pandemic, doesn't expect to raise the federal funds rate until at least 2022. The decision to leave its key interest rate unchanged comes as the Fed projected a slow economic recovery from the pandemic-induced recession, forecasting a grim outlook on the U.S. economy going forth. In their first economic projection for 2020, Fed officials say they expect the unemployment rate to be at 9.3% at the year's end and 5.5% by 2022. It also expects GDP to contract by 6.5% at the end of this year compared to the final quarter of 2019. In order to keep the market functioning, the Fed said it will continue buying government-backed debt at least at the current pace, adding it will closely monitor developments and is prepared to adjust its plans as appropriate. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says the Fed will do whatever it can for as long as it takes in order to support the recovery and limit lasting damage to the U.S. economy. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And now for the numbers on the market following Fed's announcement on Wednesday. It was a record-setting day on Wall Street as the tech-heavy NASDAQ closed above the psychological important milestone of 10,000 for the first time ever on Wednesday, even as the U.S. economy still seems stuck in recession. The NASDAQ finished at 10,020, up over 66 points, safely landing above that important milestone. But it was not the same picture for the other indices. The Dow Jones fell about 1%, while the S&P 500 was down 0.5%. Now this as the Federal Reserve kept interest rates near zero and remained cautious on the health of the American economy. The NASDAQ rally was led by Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. But some are concerned about a major correction as more aggressive investors are continuing to buy despite the economic conditions or poor corporate fundamentals. Could the world's largest computer chip and smartphone maker, Samsung Electronics, get the backing of members of the public as its de facto leader keeps finding himself in legal jeopardy? An independent citizen panel will be discussing the legitimacy of the ongoing probe into the leader Lee Jae-yong just days after a Seoul court rejected prosecutors' request for an arrest warrant. Our Chang Tae-hyun reports.
The verdict on the validity of the indictment of the de facto head of Samsung Group, Lee Jae-yong, is in the hands of an external committee comprised of 15 citizens. They're scheduled to meet on Thursday. The discussion comes as Samsung previously requested the establishment of a citizen panel to judge if the latest investigation for accounting fraud and stock manipulation was needed. This system of review was implemented 2 years ago to enhance the neutrality and fairness of the prosecution's probes. The Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office plans to establish a deliberation committee to internally discuss the request. Prosecutors and Lee's lawyers cannot be at the discussion, but have to submit a 30-page position statement. 15 regular people were selected as the committee members to look into the validity of the investigation and the indictment procedures. The result will come out later on Thursday. Even though the decision is not legally binding, experts say this will influence the prosecutor's intent to indict Lee to some degree. In the meantime, a separate trial is being held for Lee Jae-yong about bribing a confidant of former President Park Geun-hye. His sentence was halved from the initial 5 years, but the case has been sent back to the lower court for retrial. Chang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
South Korea's Supreme Court on this Thursday is set to deliver its final verdict on Choi Soonhee or Choi Soonhee, a close confidant of former President Park Geun-hye, for her role in the corruption scandal that led to the impeachment of the jailed Park Geun-hye president. Choi, who was previously known as Choi Soonhee, is accused of coercing conglomerates to make donations to 2 of her foundations and taking bribes from Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong. Now, this is the second time her case has reached the Supreme Court, and back in August last year, the court dismissed some of her charges and sent the case back to a lower court, which reduced her sentence from 20 years to its new sentence of 18 years. North Korea is warning the United States to keep quiet and tend to its own state affairs instead of commenting on inter-Korean relations, or else they'll face terrible consequences. The Director General of the North Korean Foreign Ministry's American Affairs Department, Kwon Jong-gun, said during an interview with the North state-run Korean Central News Agency that aired on Thursday. Now, this comes after the U.S. State Department said it was disappointed at North Korea's recent moves and that it wants the regime to return to cooperation and diplomacy. Kwon said there's no time for the U.S. to play South Korea's, quote, grandfather, as there's already enough to discuss between Pyongyang and Washington. Kwon also added that staying out of inter-Korean matters would help the U.S. have a successful presidential election in November. The United States Department has made it clear that North Korea needs to address its human rights issues, including religious freedom, to have a complete normalization of ties with Washington. Speaking about the report, America's top diplomat, however, refrained from commenting on the North, but instead slammed China for what he called a decades-long war on faith. Our Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The U.S. has reiterated that North Korea's human rights issues, including religious freedom, need to be cleaned up to achieve a full normalization of bilateral ties with the regime. In its annual International Religious Freedom Report, the U.S. State Department said Washington's stance has been made clear to the North's officials when the leaders of the two countries met for their second summit in Hanoi early last year. This is the first time the annual report has linked the issue of the regime's human rights with the normalization of relations. The document noted that the regime has continued to deny its people the right to religious freedom and committed violations that constitute crimes against humanity. Sam Brownback, the U.S. ambassador at large for international religious freedom, told reporters Wednesday that North Korea needs to act like a normal nation and allow its people to freely practice their faith. He stressed that North Korean people need to have freedom to gather and speak without fear of persecution for their faith. He also pointed out there has yet to be any indication from the regime to embrace even the most modest level of religious freedom. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, however, did not comment on Pyongyang during the same virtual press conference. However, he did slam the Chinese government for its repression of all religions. Pompeo also stressed the stark differences between the two countries, adding that the U.S. has the rule of law while China does not. He added the U.S. has free speech and embraces peaceful protests, but China doesn't. He didn't stop there either. Pompeo blasted Beijing, saying the U.S. defends religious freedom while China continues its decades-long war on faith. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The U.S. government will fund and carry out key studies on 3 experimental COVID-19 vaccines. According to CNN, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the country's top infectious disease expert, explained that phase 3 trials will begin by Moderna in July, followed by Oxford, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson in August and September, respectively. Phase 3 trials typically involve tens of thousands of people and measure whether a vaccine is safe and effective before it's rolled out to the public. He also said vaccine development is progressing very well, with more than 1 candidate vaccine expected to be in advanced clinical testing by early summer. The chief executive of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics says the planned Olympic Games for next year will not be done with grand splendor, as organizers announced that they're working on more than 200 ideas to simplify and reduce the cost. Speaking at a news conference on Wednesday, Toshio Muto revealed that the organizers have not ruled out reducing the number of fans, but the competition schedule remains unchanged for now. He also stressed that ensuring the health and safety of the athletes and spectators is their top priority. The 2020 Games in Tokyo were initially set to start at the end of July, which is next month, but it was postponed by a year due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good morning. We had a soupy start to the day, and certain parts of the country are likely to be hot and humid all day, with a chance of the southern inland regions seeing passing showers in the afternoon. So temperatures in the south will be 2 to 5 degrees lower than yesterday, but parts of Gyeongsang-Bukdo province and Daegu will still see highs in the 30s under a heat wave advisory, while upper parts of the country will be as hot and sunny as yesterday. For a closer look, Seoul should get up to 32 degrees Celsius this afternoon, Gyeongju at 29 degrees, but Jeju will be rather cloudy all day at a high of 26 degrees this afternoon. The first round of heat wave in the capital will ease. Temperatures will return to seasonal norms this weekend with nationwide rain in the forecast, while Jeju Island will see frequent showers for next few days. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
And that's a wrap with this edition of Arirang News on this Thursday. But stay close, because we'll be back with more of the day's headlines coming up in our later newscast at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.